Hello, and welcome to a Jesus Followers 30-Year Journey to Judaism podcast, an audio adaptation of the memoir of similar name. I am your host and the author, J.S. Clark. In this podcast, I will be reading for you the story of my growing up as a sincere follower of the Nazarene and the questions that led me to the old path of the Jewish people. With the help of the Almighty, on with the show. Chapter: Post-Evangelical, Pre-Messianic. We stayed longer at Medical Lake Community Church, in my recollection, than any of the other churches. 4 years or so. I was baptized there. I sat under two pastors whom I knew by name. I made friends there that I still have. I went on youth group retreats. We went rappelling down rock faces, camped out under the stars, and had insomniacs, all-nighters, where we studied through whole epistles with breaks to play GoldenEye on N64. And I point out again that none of the teachings from that pulpit stood out as aberrant, then or looking back. On the other hand, I drifted into this church with my family, and aside from Jack's classes, I was not really paying attention to what the teachers and elders were saying. I admit this in full disclosure, knowing it will make it sound like I was falling into a cult. To this day I have friends or family who think this. What can I say to convince you otherwise? I would ask a counter-question. How was it that I had been in churches that long, and until then no one had gotten me to positively engage in the faith? On a deep personal level, cult or not, Jack's teachings did begin to show itself as out of step with MLCC. At least that much registered. Later, when he was gone, other teachers took turns with myself and other former students, showing that Jack's instructions were indeed greater in depth and challenge. The replacement studies were generally fill-in-the-blank type studies, very on the rails. It seemed Jack was the only teacher who thought high schoolers capable of verse-by-verse hermeneutics. I'm not trying to disparage Medical Lake, but to demonstrate that I was not in a cultish fringe church. I was in an environment that taught the normal Protestant evangelical idea of once saved, always saved, grace through faith, forgiven once for all, etc., and that environment was failing to make a more compelling case than an individual teaching biblical obedience. The conflict in teachings was soon mirrored by drama in the church. I do not claim to know the definitive story, but eventually Jack had to leave. While my opinions about what actually took place, allegations against church leadership, have modified, it did instill in me the sense that for many Jesus followers, grace displaced even godly fear. Rosh Hashanah. Jack's last lesson, as I recall, before his abrupt exit, was on the subject of Rosh Hashanah. I do not remember what book we were studying, perhaps we had gone topical, but Rosh Hashanah was the immediate subject. This is the beginning of the civil year on the Hebrew calendar. It is also known in some Messianic circles as Yom Teruah, the day of the shofar blast, and occurs on the 7th month of the Hebrews' religious calendar. This holy day is not merely a Jewish thing, but it is actually a commanded biblical feast from Leviticus 23. Why should this be a subject in a church in a small town near Spokane? I shrug. But considering how many other paths my life could have taken, I see in this God's guiding hand. The lesson touched on things like Jewish idioms. In Matthew 24:36, Jesus talked about returning on a day that no man knows. This was always held up as Jesus saying that he could come back at any time. However, the day no man knows is not just a way of describing any day. The Hebrew calendar month begins with the new moon. The lunar month has roughly 29.5 days in it, meaning some months would be 29 solar days and others 30. And while calculations could be and were done to figure out how long a month would be, the first day of a month was treated like a mystery, called the day that no man knows. Naturally, there would be 12 days that no man knows in the Hebrew year. But there is only one feast that God instituted back in Leviticus 23 that falls on such a day, Rosh Hashanah. This becomes amazing when you note the day's theme of blowing the shofar, ram's horn, which is why the average churchgoer might know it as the Feast of Trumpets. That should give any follower of Jesus chills when they remember some key verses like Joel 2:1-15. Blow ye the trumpet in Zion, for the day of the Lord comes. Blow the trumpet in Zion, sanctify a fast, call a solemn assembly. The Feast of Trumpets is a memorial according to Leviticus 23:24. But the text does not say what it is a memorial for. Numbers 10:9 through 10 says the trumpet calls God to remember and help in the day of battle. And then, right after that, it tells them to also blow the trumpets on feast days and solemn days. It is easy to see why the rabbis would associate the Feast of Trumpets with the day of the Lord. And the same tradition continues in the New Testament, speaking of the Son of Man's coming. Jesus says in Matthew 24:31, "And he shall send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet, and they shall gather together his elect." Paul, in 1 Corinthians 15:52, says, "In a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trump." And 1 Thessalonians 4:16, "For the Lord himself shall descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of an archangel, and the trump of God." As if hinting at this, Revelation 1:10 reports, "I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day, and I heard behind me a great voice, as a trumpet," adding together the idiom and the association of trumpet blasts to the coming of Jesus and the day of the Lord. My mind was blown. This was so cool. How awesome was it that God had hidden clues to the second coming of Jesus in the ancient feasts since Moses' time? This should have been no surprise. I am not sure when it occurred, but a seed of thought was also planted there. I had been in church for 8 years by then, and I had never heard a teaching on Rosh Hashanah, or any delving into what this trumpets could signify. I had heard many teachings alluding to the day that no man knows, yet never one referencing traditional Jewish understanding. How had I been in church for this long and never heard this? Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you liked what you heard, please like, share, and subscribe. If you didn't like it, no one likes a tattletale, and it's my first podcast that I didn't record in my car on a phone, so go easy on me. If you really liked it and want to show support, feel free to visit J.S. Clark on Patreon. Or you can buy or recommend one of my books, including Finding Home, a Jesus Follower's 30-Year Journey to Judaism, available on Lulu, Amazon, and Smashwords. If you have questions or comments, reach me at jsclarkpresents@gmail.com. If it fits, I'll plug it into the show. I'm also to be found on X at jsclark5768 or Threads at jsclarkpresents. Lastly, more info and occasional updates at jsclarkwordcraftsman.net. All the best.